Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of cryptids horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story, the creature from my nightmares. I used to move a lot. That has always been a fact of life for me. When I was a kid, my parents would never stay in one town for too long. Some places we could stay in for years, and others we couldn't stay in for more than a few months. As an only child, it always felt like a new adventure. I was a lonely kid who loved being the center of attention, so the long road trips where my parents had to talk to me were a dream. Honestly, I feel like it bonded my family. I learned to always move forward and never look back. It made my parents and I very close, like to the point where I told them everything and I assumed they did the same to me. So, when they told me that their jobs were the reason that we moved so often, I believed them. I had no reason not to. Plus, I was too young and naive to come to a different conclusion. But, now that I'm older, I'm starting to think that it was more than that. Much more. I guess I really started to realize something was wrong when I moved out. I left home almost immediately after high school to find myself. I was never a college-bound kid. I was always more interested in taking pictures of nature than sitting down at a school desk. I wanted to live life. My parents seemed reluctant to let me go. They were constantly trying to talk me out of it. It became a point of much contention between us, a topic to tiptoe around at family dinners. It wasn't as if we never fought. This just felt different. When they realized that they weren't going to change my mind about it, they decided to let it go for the most part. They even helped me pack. But before they let me leave, they made me promise to always keep moving if anything ever felt wrong. Just like when I was little. I wasn't entirely sure what that promise entailed, but I promised anyway, if only to ease their worries. I chose to move into a small apartment in a lazy town in the south. I got a job as a waitress at a nice restaurant, the kind that served homemade pie and a smile. My coworkers were great, always fawning over my Midwestern accent with their southern drawl. It was all new to me. I even got a cat. She was black and stealthy and loved to explore. Her name was Lilith, and she practically became my child. My calls home were frequent, but almost every call ended with them asking if I had any dreams. It was an innocent enough question, but the way they asked sent shivers down my spine. I wasn't sure why, but then the nightmare happened. I had forgotten about it, though that's what always used to happen with them. If I wasn't actively experiencing them, it was almost like it fell into the recesses of my mind. That damn nightmare was the bane of my existence. It's the only recurring dream I've ever had. It goes like this. I'm forced to watch as a creature moves through a thick fog. It was kind of hard to spot it because of how pale it was. It basically blended in. It looked tall, with limbs that were much too long to be proportionate. It stood at 8 feet, at least, and its arms almost dragged on the ground beside it. The only thing that helped me spot it was its eyes. They were red and glowing like a beacon piercing through the mist. I am trapped in my spot, entranced by its penetrating stare. We would stay like this the whole night, never moving, until it finally moves to make a step toward me. Then I would wake up, usually drenched in my own sweat, too afraid to leave my bed. The first time it happened was after we had come home from a camping trip when I was 7. I had been so glad to be back in my own bed again that I practically passed at the second my head hit the pillow. When I woke up, I had run into my parents' room, sobbing and telling them about the monster in my dream. They let me sleep in their room, tucked into the safety of their blankets. The nightmares continued like that for a week. Each night, I dreaded going to bed more than the last. The creature got progressively closer with every dream. Finally, one night it reached out and touched me, and the terrifying feeling that surged through me was unmatched. The next night, I didn't even attempt to sleep in my room. I thought that if I fell asleep in my parents' bed, I wouldn't dream the same dream. In a weird way, I was right. That night I didn't dream. Sleep eluded me. I stared endlessly at the glowing red numbers of my parents' alarm clock. Then the temperature dropped, leaving me shivering. I went to pull the blanket tighter around me, only to find my hand pinned to the bed by some invisible force. I couldn't move, but I felt the burning of something's eyes on me. I looked up only to be met with red eyes. The creature stood hunched over in the corner of the dark room, sticking out like a sore thumb. Its neck was bent at an alarming angle to accommodate the ceiling. Its head was turned to the side, staring at me. I couldn't scream. My mouth was sealed shut. Silent tears streamed down my face as I tried to will myself to look away. It was like my mom could sense my distress because she woke suddenly, turning to look at me. Her eyes flew over my face before following my line of sight. A horrified scream filled the room. My father bolted up. He too looked over to the corner. Then it was as if we all froze, the three of us watching the creature as it watched me. We stayed like that for hours because I only got the ability to move again when the sun finally broke through my parents' curtains. I could finally blink. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. I ripped myself from the sweat-soaked sheets and made my way to the toilet, emptying the contents of my stomach into it. We didn't really talk about it after. My parents actively shut me down anytime I tried to, only lamenting that it wasn't real and I had dreamt it. Otherwise, it was just glossed over. We moved that day. My parents scrambled around to throw things into suitcases for a stay at my grandparents'. They ignored the slight scuff marks that marred the white ceiling and the scratches that were set deep into the wood. After that, we didn't look back. It never got to the point where the creature visited me in my home. It would just show up to stare at me in occasional nightmares, which resulted in us moving to a different town. I always chalked it up to a coincidence that we would move after the dreams. Eventually, when I turned 14, we moved across the country, and the nightmares kinda just stopped. We stopped moving and I kind of forgot about them. They were like a distant memory, until now. I couldn't tell you why they were back, but the creature wasn't any less terrifying in my adult mind. If anything, it was more unsettling. I woke up swimming in my sheets and sweat. Lilith was staring at me in high alert. Her yellow eyes were luminescent in the dark. I pulled my phone off my nightstand and dialed my parents' number. My mom answered on the third ring. "May?" she asked, her voice groggy from sleep. "Do you remember the dreams I used to have?" I blurted out in a rushed voice. There was silence on the other line for a moment. Her breathing was the only thing that lets me know she hadn't hung up on me. "Is it back?" Those three words almost made my heart stop. "Yes. Leave. Leave as soon as possible and keep moving," she said. All sleep was gone from her voice. "What is it, Mom?" "I don't know, May, and I don't want to find out. I have a feeling you don't either. Just get out." "Okay. I love you, Mom." "Love you too, May." I listened to her hang up before I pushed myself out of bed. I started throwing clothes into boxes. I packed throughout the night because I couldn't convince myself to go back to bed and face it. I guess I finally realized that I haven't just been moving all those years. I've been running from this thing. This creature. It's dominated my whole life. After I packed my stuff, I looked it up on my phone. I have yet to find out what it is. I don't know what it wants from me or why it only visits me in my dreams. I don't know how long I can keep running from it. It's already been 12 years. But I guess I'll see it tonight. Wish me luck. Second story. I stayed at the most horrific motel in the world. The first thing that hits me when I step out of the car is the overwhelming silence. Hollow Creek is a small town nestled in the middle of nowhere, with its dwindling population and a sense of desolation hanging in the air. It's different from the kind of place you'd expect to find much work as a freelance journalist. Still, with bills to pay and a need for a change of scenery, I decided to take a chance on this mysterious letter. It said the Whispering Pines Motel is promising a story unlike any other. Now, as I approached the front desk, I can't help but wonder if it was all just a cruel joke. The receptionist, an elderly woman with a knowing smile, greets me with a forced warmth. Her name is Edna, and she tells me that I'll be staying in room 12, just down the hall. As I walk past the reception area, I can't help but notice the framed newspaper clippings on the walls. Headlines like Whispering Pines, a haven for the restless, and mysterious noises plague the night. Stories of guests leaving in the middle of the night for unknown reasons. My room is dimly lit, with a musty odor that reminds me of old books. The furniture looks like it's been here since the motel was built, and the bedspread is threadbare. A small window by the bed is covered by a thin curtain that billows in the night breeze. The motel is on the main road, and the town's only restaurant is just a few doors down and across the street. Walking through the empty street, I notice that most buildings are boarded up or appear abandoned. The only light source comes from the diner's flickering neon sign, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. I approach the diner and step inside. The atmosphere inside is comforting, almost cozy, with the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. The waitress, a young woman named Lily, greets me with a warm smile and offers to take my order. I play it cool and order coffee, hoping to start a conversation. I can't help but overhear snippets of conversations at nearby tables. One man, who looks like he's in his early 20s, is telling a story about a woman he met at the motel with a haunting past and secrets she's willing to kill to keep. Intrigued, I walk over to them and introduce myself. "You must be Riley," the man says, nodding in my direction. "I'm Tom, and this is my brother, Mark." Mark glances up from his coffee, a cautious expression on his face. "Yeah, we heard you were new in town. Lily told us you're a journalist." "That's right," I reply, sitting opposite them. "I got a letter from one of the motel's former guests, offering me a story. Something about restless spirits and strange occurrences. I was hoping you could fill me in." Tom leans in closer. "It's true, Riley. This town has a dark secret. You see, there was a fire at the Whispering Pines. It started in one of the rooms, and half the building was destroyed when they put it out. People died in that fire, and their spirits haven't been able to find peace. They say you can hear them whispering in the halls at night. I can't help but wonder if there's any truth to the story." Lily arrives with my coffee. I thank her and take a sip, savoring the warmth it brings to my hands. "So, what do you think?" Tom asks, watching me intently. "You believe us?" "It's an interesting story, but I'd like to see some proof before I write about it. Anything you can show me?" Tom and Mark exchange glances, then Tom reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, worn photo album. He slides it across the table to me, and I open it up. Inside are grainy photographs of the motel, taken years ago. Pictures of the fire, rescue workers trying to contain the flames, and a group of people standing outside the motel. "These were taken just after the fire," Tom explains. "The woman in the photo was the motel's owner's wife. Her name was Sarah. After the fire, she went crazy and talked about voices in the walls, freed spirits, and missing guests. A lot of people think she started the fire, trying to rid the place of the spirits." I glance back at the photos, taking in the haunted expression on Sarah's face. Whatever she experienced during those dark days left a mark on her. Lily arrives with food, setting a plate of eggs and bacon in front of me. "Here you go, Riley. Enjoy," she says with a warm smile. "Oh, sorry. I actually didn't order anything except coffee. Also, how do you know my name?" I ask, feeling a bit unnerved. "Well, Riley, you see," Tom begins, leaning back in his chair. Sarah isn't the only one affected by the fire. The spirits reach out to certain people and make them see things. And sometimes they share information. You must have something special about you that they recognize. I glance around the diner, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The other patrons seem oblivious to our conversation, lost in their thoughts and newspapers. "So, what else can you tell me about Sarah?" I ask, changing the subject. Tom shakes his head. No one could ever prove anything. The fire destroyed most of the evidence, and Sarah, well, she wasn't much help. She spent most of her time ranting about the spirits. But there were always rumors. Some people said she had helped starting the fire. Others said she was unstable and looking for a way out. As for the guests who went missing, well, no one ever found any bodies. There were whispers that the spirits had taken them, too. He pauses, taking a sip of coffee, and I can see the pain in his eyes. We all thought it was just a tragic accident at first, but over time, things started changing. We'd hear footsteps in the hallway, doors slamming shut on their own. It got so bad that some of us started avoiding the motel at night. "Do you guys work at the motel?" I ask, trying to sound casual. "You seem to know a lot about what happened." "Well, yeah, I've been here for a few years now, and Mark here has been working the night shift. We've all seen and heard things that, well, it's hard to explain." I nod. "So, what do you think happened to Sarah?" I ask, unable to keep the curiosity from my voice. "Do you think she's still alive?" Tom shrugs. "No one really knows. Some people say she's still here, trapped in her room, unable to escape the horrors she witnessed." I glance at Tom, noticing the haunted look in his eyes. "What about you? What do you think happened?" He takes a deep breath before answering. "Sometimes I see her in the shadows, just watching us. Other times, I think she's a ghost, trapped here with the rest of them. But it's clear that something bad went down at the motel. And it's not just in the past. It's still here, lurking in the darkness." The rest of our conversation lasted as long as it took me to eat. I was exhausted and needed to sleep before I started writing. So I went back to the motel at around 8:30 p.m. and settled in bed. I could have sworn I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. They were faint, barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. I could sleep through it, telling myself it was a staff member doing their duties. I finally fell asleep until I heard this high-pitched, non-stop squeak, stuttering every few seconds. It wasn't loud, but just enough to wake me up. I look over at the clock. It reads 3:08 a.m. I decide to open the door slowly, its creak intensifying the mysterious squeak. Nothing, no one there. I walk slowly as the noise gets louder, but I cannot locate it. I thought it could be an old furnace that they never replaced, but the air in the hallway was so cold. Deciding to believe my furnace assumption, I headed back to my room, but on my way, I could have sworn I had heard someone whispering. When I moved closer, it sounded like it was coming from the walls, just like the town folks said. As I close the door and crawl back into bed, the whispering grows louder, like it's outside my door. It's getting harder to ignore. The whispers are saying something. I lie there, paralyzed with fear, until finally, the whispering fades away into the distance. The next day, I push the strange occurrences out of my mind and focus on my work. I spent most of the day researching the motel's history. As the day drags on, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that the motel is alive with a malevolent energy that's intent on driving me mad. Around dinner time, I take a break from my research and venture into town. I'm hoping to find someone who might have some insight into what really happened to Sarah. As I walk along the empty street, the air is thick with anticipation, as if the town is holding its breath and waiting for something terrible to happen. I stop at the diner and take a seat at the counter. The waitress, not the same as last night, an older woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile, sets a menu in front of me. I notice the prices are shockingly low. When I ask her about it, she just says, "Around here, we take care of our own." I order a burger and a soda, hoping to gather enough courage to ask questions. When the food arrived, I couldn't help but notice that it was some of the best diner food I'd ever had. The waitress must be using some family recipes. As I eat, I discuss with an elderly man sitting at the end of the counter. His name is Hank, and he's lived in the town all his life. "You're new around here?" he asks. When I confirm his suspicion, he leans close, lowering his voice. "You should be careful about asking too many questions. This town has a long memory, and we don't take kindly to outsiders who pry into our business." His words chill me, but I can't help but press on. "I'm just trying to find out what happened to Sarah," I say, my voice barely audible. Hank eyes me before leaning back in his chair. "Well, you've got to understand," he begins. "Sarah was different. She wasn't like the rest of us. She didn't belong here." I'm taken aback by his words, but I nod, encouraging him to continue. "But she was still a person, right? She deserved better than whatever happened to her." Hank glances around the diner, lowering his voice even further. "You're right, she did. But you see, there was an incident. Something that changed everything. Something that made people start talking, whispering." He hesitates momentarily, then leans in closer. "You see, there was a time when the motel was different. It was alive in a way. People would come from miles around just to see it, just to see its magnificent decor and lively air." Hank sighed heavily as if the story's weight was too much for him to bear. "Back then, the motel had another owner, a middle-aged man named Jeremiah. He was different, too. He was married to Sarah." He pauses, looking haunted by the memory. "There was a fire at the motel. No one knows how it started, but it spread quickly. Sarah and Jeremiah had 4 boys. 2 of the oldest sons died in the fire along with their father." I let out a gasp, unable to believe the horror of the story. "But what happened to Sarah?" I ask, feeling a deep sense of dread creeping up on me. "She went crazy and locked herself away in the motel after they restored it. She would go on about how she freed those poor spirits. The now oldest son took over the motel," he says. "Did authorities not suspect Sarah?" I ask. "Oh, they did. They brought her in for questioning, but they were never able to get anything other than her crazy ramblings. They never found enough evidence to prosecute anyone, so it was deemed an accident," he says. I'm stunned. "So, she's still there?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Hank laughs. "That's what people around here say, but that was 40-something years ago, and if I'm to guess by her looks, Sarah was in her mid-40s. That would mean she would be almost 80, and I don't reckon she could stay alive that long without leaving her room. But if she really did set the fire and hurt those people..." I trail off. Hank shrugs. Like I said, no one knows for sure what happened, and after all this time, it's probably best left that way. He glances at his watch, signaling that the conversation is over. I nod, feeling a mixture of disbelief and horror coursing through me. Something about Sarah's story refuses to let me go. I thank Hank for his time and pay for my lunch, leaving the diner. As I walk back to the motel, I can't help but wonder, was Sarah genuinely insane or just trying to protect something? With its faded grandeur and haunted past, the motel holds a strange allure for me now. It's as if I can feel the weight of its history pressing down on my shoulders, demanding that I uncover the truth. I get to my room and spend the rest of the day exploring the motel grounds. The air is thick with the scent of old wood and damp earth, and the sound of leaves rustling in the distance. I wander past open rooms with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. I find a dusty photo album on a dresser in one of the abandoned rooms. Carefully opening the tattered cover, I discover a collection of faded photographs depicting the motel in its heyday. Couples dancing beneath twinkling chandeliers, laughing children running through the hall. There's even a picture of Sarah and Jeremiah smiling brightly for the camera. I close the album, feeling a strange mixture of nostalgia and sadness. As I turn to leave, I notice a bookshelf in the hallway. Most books are dog-eared romance novels, but one title catches my eye, The Haunting of the Hotel Amity, a true story. It seemed morbidly fitting for the scene, but I decided to move past it and head to the front desk to interview Edna. The afternoon passes quickly as I spend time with Edna, listening to her stories of working at the motel and meeting various guests. She speaks fondly of Sarah, insisting that she is a good woman who only wants to protect the place she loves. Edna also mentioned that she had heard stories from other employees about strange occurrences in the motel. Still, she always brushed them off as superstitious nonsense. Have you never experienced anything like that? I ask, any strange occurrences? Edna pauses, her expression thoughtful. Well, there was one time when I was cleaning a room, and I swear I heard someone calling my name. I thought it was just the wind at first, but the voice sounded so real. It gave me a chill. She shudders, her eyes distant with memory. I nod, unsure what to make of her story. Even the people who were closest to Sarah were left with more questions than answers. I head back to my room. It was only 9 p.m., but I was tired, so I lay down and drifted asleep. As I closed my eyes, I thought about Sarah and her story. I couldn't help but feel that there was something more to the motel than what had been revealed. Something darker, more sinister. Perhaps the faded photos in the album or the eerie silence seemed to permeate the halls, but I couldn't shake the feeling that a story was yet to be told. I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the motel and its secrets. In my dreams, I wandered through its empty halls. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, and in the distance, I thought I heard the faint strains of a melody, like a distant echo of a time long gone. Suddenly, in my dream, I needed to look at the book I had spotted earlier about the Amity Hotel. Something about it drew me in, and when I went to pick it up, I was awoken by the loud, stuttered squeak like the one from the night prior. I look at the clock again, 3:04 a.m. The dream felt real, and the urge to investigate the book was almost overwhelming. I slip out of bed, padding quietly across the carpeted floor. The eerie silence of the motel seems to press against my ears as I make my way to the bookshelf in the corner. There, nestled between a romance novel and a travel guide, is the worn copy of The Haunting of the Hotel Amity, a true story. I pulled it down, but it only moved slightly, getting stuck when I tried pulling further. Finally, after yanking a bit, I felt it give a little more. It's frozen in place as if it was tipping. Suddenly, I hear an amalgamation of gears turning behind it, and the shelf opens slightly on one side. I pull on the release side, and it opens like a door, leading to a passageway between the walls. I step inside, flicking on my phone's flashlight. The narrow passageway is dimly lit by flickering bulbs every few feet, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air is musty and stale. I make my way down the passageway, the squeak louder the further I go. I can see a dark opening at the end, so I put on a brave face and walk toward it when I hear a voice from the dark opening. I could barely hear it over the loud squeak and couldn't understand what they were saying, but I knew I shouldn't be here anymore. So I sneaked out of the passage. I tried to close the door as slowly as possible, but the voices were approaching fast, so I left it ajar. Rushing into bed, slowly closing the door as it creaked louder than I anticipated. Finally, I was in bed, mind racing with the possibilities of what was in that room at the end of the passageway. The voices grew louder as they approached my room. I shut my eyelids tight. They were right in front of my door. This time, I could faintly make out some words. There were words like her and has to be, and the one that made my heart race was only guessed here. The handle turned slowly, and the door creaked open. I loosened my eyelids to peek at who it was, revealing a shadowy figure in the doorway. It was Edna, but there was something different about her. Her usually kind face was twisted in anger, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. She glanced at me, for just a moment before she turned her attention back to the others in the hall. "Leave her for now," Edna said. The other voices murmured in agreement, their whispers echoing down the hall. As they turned away, I felt a chill run down my spine. Finally, they leave. I slowly get out of bed, and as quietly as possible, I pack my things. I planned to jump out of the window if I had to. Suddenly, the squeak stopped, and the motel was much too quiet again. The eerie silence of the motel seems to press against my ears as I try to calm my racing thoughts. I close my eyes, but I can't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up on me. Just as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear a faint click coming from the hallway. My heart starts pounding again as I realize someone is moving through the motel, methodically checking each room. The clicking grows louder as the person gets closer, and I hear footsteps outside my door. I lie there, paralyzed. The footsteps pause outside my door, and I hear a low whisper. "She's in here." I freeze. Yeah, she's in there, but Edna doesn't want us to disturb her until Tom says it's time. Tom? I thought to myself, the guy from the diner on my first night? The one that already knew my name before introducing myself? "Man, fuck Tom," one of the voices said. "Just being Jeremiah's son is the only reason we have to listen to that prick. Yeah, unless you want to end up in one of his films, you better listen to that prick," the other man proclaims. The two sets of footsteps walk away from my door. Films? What the hell were they talking about? Why did Edna seem so angry earlier? Why were these men talking about me in the hallway like I was a film project? As the night wears on, I can't help but feel like I'm at the center of some sort of twisted game. I lie awake, listening to the occasional creak of a floorboard or whispered conversation down the hall. Eventually, exhaustion overtakes me, and I fall into a fitful sleep. I first notice the light streaming through the window when I wake up. It's morning, and with it comes a sense of urgency. I quickly dress and gather my things, making my way to the diner. As I approach, I see Tom sitting at a booth, already deep in conversation with Mark. They glance up at me as I enter, and Tom motions for me to join them. "Good morning, sunshine," Tom says with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Care to join us?" I sit across from them, trying to ignore the feeling of unease that settles in my stomach. "Good morning," I managed to say. So, how are you finding our little motel? Tom asks, leaning in closer. I hope we're taking good care of you. There's an undertone to his voice that I can't quite place. I force a smile, trying to appear more confident than I feel. It's been fine, I guess. Tom raises an eyebrow at my non-committal response. I hope you don't mean that as a complaint. We've gone to great lengths to ensure you have everything you need. I glance at Mark sitting next to Tom. His expression is unreadable, and he seems to be observing me. It's not that, I say quickly, hoping to reassure them. I'm not used to being around so little people. There, that sounds believable. Well, hopefully, you will settle in a little bit before you have to leave. See my brother Mark here? He gestures over to Mark. He's in charge of maintenance, and if there's anything he can do to help you feel more comfortable, let him know. Tom says with a forced smile. I nod, still feeling uneasy. Thank you. I'm sure I'll be fine. I glance around the diner, trying to appear calm and collected. The place is filled with small wooden tables and booths, each covered in a checkered red and white tablecloth. The walls are adorned with old movie posters and black and white photographs of people I assume are famous actors. The air is thick with the scent of coffee and bacon, making my stomach rumble. So, what's on the menu today? I ask, hoping to change the subject. Tom hands me a menu, and I scan the options, debating between pancakes and eggs. I'll have the pancakes, please. I look up at Tom, then Mark, waiting for their response. Excellent choice, Tom says with a smile. I'm sure you'll enjoy them. Mark, will you go ahead and get our order? Mark nods and stands, making his way over to the waitress. I watch him go, still feeling a sense of unease. The air between Tom and me has become heavy, and I can't help but wonder what they want from me. As I wait for our food, I glance around the diner again, hoping to find some escape route. The exit is right behind me, but a large man is sitting in a booth by the door, looking like he might be a bouncer at a bar. I don't want to make a scene, but I must leave. The waitress returns with our food, setting down plates of steaming hot pancakes in front of us. The aroma is intoxicating, and my stomach grumbles in anticipation. I pick up my fork, debating whether or not to eat anything at all. Tom glances at my plate and smiles reassuringly as if he can read my mind. A few bites in, I realize my anxiety won't let me eat anymore. I try to find an excuse to leave and investigate the motel further.
I'm sorry, Tom.
I feel like I need some fresh air, I say, smiling. I'm going to step outside for a bit, maybe go for a walk, I say, hoping he doesn't hear my voice shake. Tom nods understandingly. Of course, Riley. Take your time. We'll be right here if you need anything. He reaches across the table and gently pats my hand, his expression softening. I push my chair back and stand up, trying to appear calm and confident as I walk towards the exit. As I pass by the large man in the booth, he gives me a quick once-over before returning to his meal. The air outside is cool and crisp, and I take a deep breath of fresh air. The motel is just across the street, and I can see Tom and Mark sitting in the diner, watching me. I stroll down the sidewalk, pretending to look at the shops along the way. But really, my attention is focused on the motel. The neon sign flickers above the door, casting an eerie glow on the building. The rooms are arranged in a U-shape around a central courtyard. I pause for a moment, debating whether or not to go inside. A part of me wants to know what Tom and Mark are up to, but another part is terrified of what I might find. Before I can decide, a car pulls beside me, and a woman rolls down her window. Hey, honey, need a ride somewhere? She asks, her voice laced with a southern drawl. She's probably around my mom's age, with long, curly, graying hair and a warm smile. Something about her seems genuine, and I trust her for a moment. No thanks. I'm feeling sick, so I'm going back to my room, I said before quickly walking away. It felt like the entire town was watching me. I make my way back to the motel, my heart racing. I try to calm my nerves as I approach my room. As soon as I unlock the door, I collapse onto the bed, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and fear wash over me. I close my eyes and try to think about anything else, but I can't shake the feeling of anxiety. Now is an excellent time to look further into the dark opening at the end of the passageway I found last night. I carefully walk down the hallway, feeling the cool air from the vent blowing against my face. The walls are covered in peeling wallpaper, and a strong, musty odor makes me feel uneasy. As I approach the bookshelf, I attempt to reach for the Amity Hotel book, but when I pull it, nothing happens. I didn't dream that whole thing, did I? No, they must have changed the book. So I go through each individual book, pulling each one carefully. Can I help you find anything in particular? Edna said with a bit of contempt as she snuck up behind me. I spun around, startled. Oh, no. Just, looking for a book I thought I saw. Edna raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Well, you're not going to find it here, she said, gesturing to the bookshelf. Those books are just for show. She paused, studying me for a moment. Why were you looking for, anyway? It was something about a hotel in Amity. Considering where I am, I thought it would be a good read. I reply, still trying to play it cool. Edna chuckles darkly. Oh, that's Tom and Mark's favorite. One of them probably took it with them. Oh, okay. I'll look for something else then, I say, glancing back at the bookshelf. Edna watches me for a moment before disappearing back into her room. I stand there momentarily before continuing to search for the book lever that opens the bookshelf, trying to be as quiet as possible. Finally, one book will only pull out some of the way. It had to be another lever, but remembering how loud the hidden door was, I decided to wait to pull it when I hear the loud squeak tonight, hoping it would mask most of the sound of the gears turning behind the door. Late that night, I creep out of my room and return to the bookshelf. The air is thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke. I carefully yanked the book out as far as it could go before I could hear the gears. I'm confident the squeak is loud enough to mask the bookshelf. I opened it and slid into the passageway leading to the dark opening. I step inside, and the squeak is almost too much, but I press on. I hear multiple men talking loudly and laughing as I enter the room. As I turn the corner, I can see lights dancing on the wall like someone was watching an old movie, and the smell of cigar smoke fills my lungs. Quietly moving further in, I can see a giant old movie projector that was making the stuttered squeak from its giant bent and dented film rolls scraping against the side of the projector. I look to see what is playing on the screen, but I'm distracted by about 8 men, mostly old except Tom, Mark, and another younger-looking man. They don't see me, or they don't care enough to acknowledge me. They were sitting in a makeshift movie theater, but none of the fun. Finally, I looked up at the screen and felt sick. They were showing a homemade old snuff film. Then I realized it couldn't be that old since I recognized Tom and Mark. They were doing unspeakable things with women of all ages. I look down at the group of men and see them all staring at me with a menacingly evil grin. I froze in immense fear. Staring at them for an eternity, I suddenly felt a sting in my neck, like someone had injected me with something. As my vision darkened, I could see the face of the man holding me with one hand and a syringe in the other. It was the bouncer-looking man I had seen in the diner. When I wake up, my head is pounding. The room is spinning, and my vision is blurry. I can see little memory flashes of the group picking me up and moving me to the room next to the makeshift theater. My clothes are gone, and I'm naked except for a loose robe. There's a sour taste in my mouth, and my body feels heavy and sour. I'm tied to a mattress that smells like sweat and fear. I struggle against my bonds, but they're too tight. I see an antique film camera on an even older tripod. There were huge lights all around me that were turned off. Suddenly, they were blinding me as I heard the men laughing. "Oh, Walter Cronkite, what will we do with you?" I recognized Tom's voice. "You were this close." A shame, but I can't say I'm surprised. You have a lot of fight, and we love that. The men laugh way too hard. The camera is pointed at me. It's old and dusty, but still working. I close my eyes and try to steel my nerves, but I can't help but feel sick. The memory of the snuff film plays over and over in my head, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm about to be a part of it. Now, Tom," I hear Mark say, his voice steady and calm. "No need for that. We've got plans for Anderson Cooper here." The other men chuckle menacingly. "She's going to be a star." As Tom approaches me, I hear most men leave the room, and Mark sets up behind the camera. "You want to know the full story, Hunter S. Thompson? I think you deserve to know at this point," Tom says as he undoes his belt. "Well, let me fill in some blanks for you." He sits next to me on the floor after taking off his shirt. "You see, my father, Jeremiah, had a great business going here, and I'm not talking about the motel. He would lure women to stay here, where he would drug them and film himself having his way with them while someone filmed through the two-way mirror. It was a great business, those films. Rich people from all around the world would buy them. Plus, most women never even knew what happened by the time they checked out, but the ones who gave us trouble had to be dealt with. Eventually, my mom, Sarah, got a little too nosy. She kept asking about how my father could make so much money while running a motel, so she snooped into his things and found some evidence that would crumble our entire family. She confided her findings to her two oldest sons, but when she realized they were in on it too, she went crazy. We tried to keep her quiet, but she wouldn't let it go. Finally, one day, she couldn't take the guilt, and the madwoman opened every unlocked room. She would set anything flammable on fire. Eventually, the fire got out of control and started to spread. The fire killed my brother and father, along with a lot more of the women my mom was trying to save. We finally stopped it, and being about 20 at the time, I already knew what was going on and was more than ready to take it over with some improvements. He stops for a second, reminiscing on memories. He touches my face softly with the back of his hand. It's a rough hand that feels like sandpaper scraping my cheek. I was going to leave my mother alive, but when she kept talking about saving victims' spirits, she was making me nervous. I was close with my mother as a kid, so I didn't have the heart to kill her myself, but Mark here, he gestured toward Mark behind the camera. He's a cold, hard killer. He stares at Mark for a long time. We couldn't do it out in the open like my father and brothers did, so I had them build passages into the walls of the hallways, opened by various bookshelves, and added a whole hidden room at the end. Doing it during the restoration, it was a perfect cover. We still use all the equipment my father used. As you can see, he gestures to the antique camera that was now filming them. It's a bitch to find someone willing to develop the film, let alone someone who won't ask questions, but I had to keep it this way to honor my father and brother's legacy. He pauses, leaning close to me, his breath hot on my ear. "And now, it's your turn. You're going to be the next big star. You're going to have your own room." He gestures around the damp, death-filled room. "Your own things. You'll be taken care of and never have to leave. You'll be part of the family." His hand runs through my hair, cupping the back of my head. And Mark, don't forget to get some shots of my good side. Oh, I won't, Mark says with a chuckle. He walks around me, positioning himself so the camera can point straight at my face. I try to shrug off the chills that run down my spine as I think about the stories Tom has just told me, and all I see is a lost man looking for something to hold on to. Tom gets on top of me and starts kissing my neck, and I feel like throwing up. I can feel the ropes on the left hand are loose, so I take a minute to wiggle it out without letting anyone in the room notice. Once I got that hand free, I could get the other free, but I wasn't ready to fight back. I needed to wait for the right time. Suddenly, the camera audibly stops recording, and Tom notices and looks back at Mark. What the hell is going on? Tom asks angrily. The film got stuck. Shit. I'm going to have to get a whole new one. Hold on 1 second. Mark says as he turns his back to exit the room. Tom gets up, and I finally feel like I can breathe properly. His back is turned, inspecting the camera. Old fucking thing, Tom says to himself. I take the opportunity to untie both ankles. As soon as I'm free, I lunge forward, wrapping my arms around Tom's waist and pulling him off balance. He lets out a surprised yelp as we both crash to the ground. I scramble to my feet and take a few steps back, breathing hard. Tom glares at me, looking furious. You little bitch, he shouts. You think you can just take it from me? From my family? He scrambles to his feet as well, advancing on me slowly. I could kill you where you stand. I back away, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm not going to let you do this, I say, trying to sound more confident than I feel. I'm not going to be another victim. Tom laughs darkly, his eyes narrowing. Oh, you think you're so special? You think you're the first one to say no? He steps closer. You're just like all the others. You're just another piece of meat. My anger boils over, and I launch myself at him again. We wrestle for a moment, both of us grunting with exertion. He's stronger than me, but I push him against the bookshelf, where he loses his balance, and his head falls onto the corner of a dirt-stained counter. I walk slowly toward him, and I can see a pool of blood forming around his matted blonde hair. He's not breathing. Mark, who must have heard the commotion, runs, and just then, he freezes while looking down at his brother. No, 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 no. Tom, you can't do this to me. I can't do this shit alone. Mark is sobbing while holding his brother's blood-soaked head. I saw my opportunity and took it. I try to run past Mark, but he catches me by the ankle, making me drop to the floor. You're not leaving, he shouts, his voice hoarse with rage. He pulls a knife from his pocket, his hands trembling with fury. You'll tell everyone you're sorry, and then come with me. I kick him in the face as hard as I can, making him release his grip on my ankle. He clutches his nose, blood pouring between his fingers. I turn and run, hearing him screaming obscenities behind me. I bolt out of the room, racing through the building while luckily not alerting anyone, not knowing where I'm going. I have to get out of here. Outside, the air is cold and damp, the fog rolling off the ocean. I'm disoriented, my heart pounding in my chest. I am still determining where I am, but I know I must find help. I start running, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. I come to a main road, a car's headlights blinding me as it speeds past. I wave my arms frantically, but the driver doesn't notice. Panic starts to rise up inside me as I realize that I'm alone and that no one knows what happened. I can't go back there, not after what I've done. I start to walk, trying to figure out where I'm going. My feet are cold and numb, but I keep moving. The fog thickens, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. I wish I had a cell phone to call the police and get help. After what feels like hours of walking, I finally spot a street light. It's barely enough light to see by, but it's better than nothing. I walk towards it, hoping there might be a nearby house or business where I can find help. As I get closer, I see a police officer at a red light. I run to him, probably looking like a crazy crackhead with only a robe, and I'm sure I smell like death. The officer looks at me with a mixture of surprise and concern. "Help me," I gasp out between breaths. These people, I find myself unable to talk or see the words for what has happened. The officer takes my arm, his grip firm but not painful. He looks at me with concern, his brow furrowed. "Take it easy. You're safe now. What's your name?" I tell him my name, feeling the fog of shock starting to lift from my brain. "Okay, why don't you tell me what happened?" I spend the next hour or so trying to explain everything to him, not caring how crazy I sound. He listens intently, occasionally asking questions or nodding his head. When I finish, he sighs heavily, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. "Okay, I need you to come to the station with me. We'll get this all sorted out." We take off in his cruiser. I spent the night at the police station, retelling my story to a half-dozen people and getting medical care. The officer who saved me last night told me they sent someone this morning to the motel to check it out. He said that night, no one except Edna was in the building. She let them look around, and eventually, they found the hidden passages in the walls leading to the basement where they found everything. They arrested Edna, and she denied involvement, but they kept her for further questioning. They claim Edna was the only one there, so Mark must have gotten away. That was a little over a decade ago, and they still haven't located Mark. Maybe he's dead in a ditch where he belongs. Still, maybe, just perhaps, he could recreate their operation at a new motel. Anytime I see one, I have PTSD flashbacks of laying on that dirty mattress. Once, I was shopping at a department store and saw this guy on every lane I went down. He never looked at me enough to get a good look at his face, but eventually, he left after I locked myself in the bathroom for an hour. It's funny how the mind works. I'll be watching a movie, and I'll see a character get kidnapped, and I'll think, at least they didn't cut my ear off like that guy did. Third story. Yeti. I was hardly known as being a particularly brave man, so you could imagine my surprise when my master, who I was currently working under for a fair amount of wage, stood up from his black leather couch and announced to the whole room, "Grab your things, Charles. We shall be embarking upon an expedition." Just following a rather aged documentary about Mount Everest and the local legends of a terrible beast, the Yeti, which wandered the mountain. Irwin Baker had always had a fascination with the unknown, and as his valet I was inclined to listen to his frequent ramblings of the occult and supernatural, and occasionally even partake in the occasional ritual that he claimed would grant immortality or some other fanciful enhancement. Perhaps it was because he was so rich that life just didn't hold its element of surprise as much any longer, and this was just one of his many attempts to stave off boredom. Either way, I do not claim to know, and soon we had traveled from London to Rome, and from Rome to Turkey, and finally the long journey from Turkey to Nepal. Nepal was a very cold place, might I say. The air was thin, and the locals were more than happy to relieve us of a few pounds in exchange for supplies for our rather impromptu expedition. We had gathered a team of a rough and ready sort, and our guide, who went by the name of Lawrence Fisher, had vexed me from the very beginning. He bore a greasy black handlebar mustache and a head of similar colored hair, and carried himself as if he was a prince. My master and I must have shared the same loathing, but he had claimed to have made it to the top and down 5 different times. Lawrence also claimed to have made arrangements and after staying in Nepal for a night, we began our trip to the base of the great mountain via a bus. My master was a little upset at its condition, as it was rusty and worn, and rattled us every time we encountered a slight bump in the road, but he managed to at least prevent other passengers from coming aboard and mucking up the trip more than it already was. The trip to the mountain lasted 2 long days, and as I stared blankly out the window and into the hilly surroundings, I couldn't help but feel some apprehension about going on such a journey. Of course, I didn't really believe that Yetis existed, and all the different rituals my master had made me do had all ended in failure. But even so, these lands had a sort of mysticism about them, something distinctly unknown. We arrived at the base of the mountain at about noon, and when we pulled up to a small lake by the name of Imja, we saw an old rundown shack beside it. Lawrence led the group to the shack, and inside the foul-smelling place was this crusty old man who communicated only in sign language. Lawrence translated the various signs to something like footsteps on the middle, look for caves. I thought my master would be upset at such vague news, but to my surprise he gave the man a thankful nod and said, "Gentlemen, we have our course." Everyone present shared my surprise as he walked off back to the parked bus, but a few mumbles and shrugs were exchanged, and from there we moved on. Yet another 3 hours later, we reached a different part of the mountain, and the bus drove away this time. "Lead the way, Mr. Fisher," spoke my master with a cheerful voice, and we were on our way up. At this point, the air was dry, but not as cold as you may imagine. Sure, it was quite frigid, but with all the coats and layers we wore, the weather was quite bearable. I suppose the best thing I could say of our expedition was the beautiful surroundings, with massive valleys of green and incredible views of the nearby landscape. The mountain loomed overhead farther than I could see, and the snow underneath our feet was crunchy. After about a day of travel, we made camp at the flattest piece of ground we could find. Camping on Mount Everest was a painful affair, considering the bitter cold bit into you at night the further up you went. But we all made it through, and continued to follow Lawrence the next morn. It was about 2:30, according to my watch, when Lawrence stopped dead in his tracks about 50 feet ahead, and with a jubilant expression turned to us and began shouting, "We are on the trail, my friends. Look." When my master and I approached where he was standing, and were both equally shocked by the outline of what appeared to be an oversized foot in the ground. Irwin looked more overjoyed, whilst I must have appeared quite horrified by what was before me. All these years, I imagined that the pictures of footsteps upon slopes of Everest had all been staged, but the frightening reality of what was before me hit harder than I imagined. Even so, I kept my best poker face and couldn't help but grin a little at just how enthusiastic my master appeared. Usually, past the twinkle in his eyes, one could see a hint of boredom within them. It was gone now, and I thought that was a good thing, to be quite honest. The people who were with us just stood there, most with expressions of disbelief. One rubbed his eyes, while another raised a hand to his mouth. There was a little hesitation within the men as we pressed on, following the scattered prints in a hope to find where they led. "Looks to be a snowstorm in the making," Lawrence announced, picking up his pace. "We must find our Yeti before it sets in." How he knew this, I do not know, but he stomped up the snowy slopes at double time, and my master and I followed suit. There was a childish spark of adventure in me that evened out with the initial shock of seeing the mark in the snow. Perhaps I am just a weird person at heart, but Irwin's pure enthusiasm was contagious. Another night went by, and the prints were beginning to grow more and more discernible. At first, the outline was very faint, but as we continued our progress up the mountain, the marks were clearer. 3 huge toe-shaped extremities and a giant main section. Simple enough, but nonetheless frightening. A couple men had snapped some photographs of the prints we had found, as my master demanded, and we had even taken an old Polaroid along, just to make sure none of the evidence would be lost. It was another day of travel, and things were beginning to get much colder. The air was starting to become more thin, but we still pressed on. Flurries were falling from the slightly darkened sky now as we walked, but were hardly enough to cover up the trail of footprints. That night when we made camp, a boy named Inoki, who was a native of the region, approached me in my tent with a very serious expression on his youthful face. "Why does your master wish to find the Yeti?" he asked. "Mr. Irwin is a man of variety," I replied in a proud manner. "He wishes to be the first to find the Yeti and prove it exists." Inoki just stared at me blankly for a while. "I did not think that we would find Yeti. I will be leaving tomorrow. You should do the same." And with those ominous lines, he ducked out of my tent and left me there to ponder. The next morning he was nowhere to be found, and a little of our supplies had gone missing. My master didn't hold it against him, bless his soul, and acted as though nothing ever happened. A few rumors flew around here and there about why Inoki had left, but soon the rest of us forgot about him and were on our way again. Today was the day we found where the footprints led to. It was just 8 in the morning when we stumbled across the gaping maw of a cave in the distance. Sure enough, the prints went right to it. We had all gathered at the entrance and stared into the murky abyss with apprehension. Even Lawrence didn't have his usual confident look on his face anymore. The atmosphere was silent and awkward for a time before I spoke up. It was something completely uncharacteristic of me, I know, but my curiosity about what was inside the cave had piqued my interest. "I shall go in first." Everyone looked to me and nodded in a grateful way, including my master, who also appeared a little proud. For a time, I just swung my arms and cleared my throat in preparation, looking around at the expectant stares around me as I took a step forward. "I will be going in now," I restated, slowly taking a few steps forward and letting the darkness of the cave engulf me. Thankfully, we were equipped with heavy-duty flashlights for just such a circumstance, and as I entered I turned mine on. The whole cave lit up in a brilliant pale. As I progressed through it, there wasn't the usual dripping of water one would expect to hear within a cave, considering any water was probably frozen in these conditions. The tunnel snaked around a bit, forcing me through a section of left and right turns in a very rigid manner. While the walls were actually considerably close to each other, the ceiling was almost higher than I could see upwards. The cave continued on a little further before terminating in one giant cavern ahead. The ceiling was far closer to the ground here, but for some odd reason whitish blue ice had crept into the walls and ceiling until it all but covered the whole area. It was quite strange, I thought, considering I had seen no such thing within the tunnel area. Even stranger, there was no need for my light here, because the roof of the cave had a jagged hole within it that let the light of the sun cascade through the ice formations nearby. Hundreds of miniature icicles hung from the intact part of the roof, but what took my breath away was the sight of half a skeleton hanging upside down with the skull and bones of its upper body scattered haphazardly on the freezing floor below. I put my hand to my mouth, and now it was not only the cold that sent a chill down my spine. Bloody bones belonging to all kinds of various different creatures were littered all across the place. But what disturbed me most was how many of them were human. Some were hard to distinguish, because they lay in messy piles with other bones of different creatures, but the ones in plain sight were enough to let me know that we had most certainly found our Yeti. My heart nearly stopped as my eyes slowly looked over the rest of the cave, but to my immense relief the beast must not have been home at the moment. I almost couldn't bring myself to snap a Polaroid before I left, but had managed to do so in the end. When I showed the image to the group outside, everyone seemed just as frightened as I had been. That included my master, who, with an unsavory look upon his face, said, "Gentlemen, I believe we have what we came for. It is time to depart," and in a most timely fashion. Not one man raised a protest of any sort, and soon we began descending the slope of the great mountain once again. I suppose when he saw that picture, Irwin knew just what he was getting himself and his group into, and the risks outweighed the rewards. We, like many others, had gathered what little information we could and would not be pushing our luck. But I'm afraid that my tale doesn't end there, for as we stomped our way down the mountain at a reasonable rate, we were engulfed within a blizzard that descended upon us in what felt like a few minutes. The whole world was cloaked in a powdery white, and soon I had to struggle in order to see 5 feet in front of me. I made it a priority to stay by my master all the way, who plodded onwards with his gloves batting the air ahead in an attempt to aid his vision. "Well, Lawrence did warn us," I shouted, trying to stay as positive as possible. "Indeed he did, but not of how fast it would happen," came the reply, and to be honest I couldn't refute this. It had been about an hour of incessant walking, and I was sure we must have lost some men by this point. I could see none of the nearby surroundings, only an endless amount of snow and a barren wasteland beneath my feet, which I was beginning to have trouble feeling. Just as I thought things could not possibly get worse, through the unbearable howling of the wind, a terrible cacophony of roars filled the air. The noise was so loud that the ground underneath our very feet shook as if it was about to give way, and I found myself falling face first into the snow. The frozen liquid stung my already chilled flesh, but I rose back to my feet in order to join my master once again. The scream sounded unearthly. It is hard to describe, but I would liken it to the sound of 1,000 lions roaring at once mixed with the cries of 100 children. It was terrifying, to say the least, and despite the weather my master and I began running faster than ever. We became fueled by adrenaline as something from behind us slowly began growing more and more noticeable. It was a rhythmic rumble that shook the ground like the roar, but to a lesser extent. But it sounded suspicious, frightening in a primitive way, as if a man had grown 3 stories tall and was sprinting towards us. From what little I can recall of this, my theory must not have been far off, because we heard a horrible scream from behind that momentarily pierced the veil of wind before fading into the frozen oblivion for good. With pure fear to spur us on, we began almost stumbling down the mountain. That thing must not have been far behind, but the reason I believe we are still alive today is because our team bought the 2 of us time. After what felt like hours, the storm was beginning to let up. Enough for me to see the figure of Lawrence Fisher lagging slightly behind us and occasionally glancing back into the storm in fear. The only memory I have of the beast itself is the massive, hairy arm that momentarily reached out from the cloak of snow to grab the entirety of his torso and drag him, screaming at the top of his lungs for help, into the ocean of murky white. Irwin and I didn't stop running until we were away from the storm, and even then were sure to behave as if paranoid. And after 3 days of no sleep and exhausting travel, we managed to stumble down off that god-forsaken mountain and back to the closest thing to civilization that was nearby. Besides my master and I, only one man made it off that mountain alive, and it was the boy Inoki, who we actually ended up meeting on the way down. He had been traveling at a much slower pace, you see, and was more than happy to share the food he had taken with us. Water wasn't exactly much of a problem, though, as you may imagine. The 3 of us made our way back to the village, after we exchanged our horrifying tale, and after thanking the boy we booked a flight back to Turkey. I am currently recording our story in this country, and make of it what you will, but please, if you value your life at all, do not visit Mount Everest. Something lurks there, amongst its frozen slopes, waiting and hunting its prey. Something that is truly horrifying.